Hello, my dearest friends, my dearest beautiful co-creator souls of love and light. This is Nanari, Princess of the Sea, coming to you with a new video. And I want to give you an update on some things and also talk about a sensitive topic. And this is the topic of grief. There have been several around me that I have mentored and recently, and also several around me who are friends and dear friends that have been going through a grieving process. Also recently, there are many people right now across the world who are going through their own grieving process, as we have lost a lot of musicians and spiritual leaders and whatnot this past year already, and the most recent being Prince. So I want to address this topic, but first I want to give a little update on some things. As many of you have seen my posts on Facebook, who are part of my Facebook and can see my posts on Facebook, I am getting ready to launch something quite amazing, something that inspired me from, as many of you know, my death that occurred, or my transition that occurred 2.5 months ago now. So just a quick update on that. I am doing better, although not 100%. As I'm doing this video right now, I still have that residual pain in my shoulder from the kidney stone pressing on my intestines. So I know it's still there. However, it is getting better because I am taking 2 forms of medicine, the Chinese medicine, the Shillentong, and then also the Peruvian medicine that I spoke of in my last video. And so between both, it is dissolving the stone and making it smaller, because I have noticed the pain and the nausea not as bad. I still can't walk far distances, and so I have my electric scooter. Thank God, and thank you all for the love offering donations that you have given to me that have been able to help sustain me living here in my little humble abode that I have here of the room I rent, and then also to be able to have some sort of transportation of my little electric scooter to be able to get places where I cannot walk. So I thank you and I deeply appreciate you for such. So that said, I'm continuing to take the medicine. And also, some other things have transformed. In my last video, I explained how I had let my twin soul go physically. I did what some dear friends of mine who are twin souls, when they went through their process as well, the gentleman called it doing the final. In other words, he had to finally walk away to allow his twin soul, for her to be able to come into who she really was and to stand in her truth. Not the truth of harm, but the truth of love. And the truth of seeing him for who he really is and seeing herself for who she really is. And so I honor them for sharing that. And I have done this many times myself. Many people have asked, well, you know, you've walked away from him so many times, you know, is it ever going to stick? Well, the twin soul path and the twin soul journey, this sacred path has many layers to it. And so as part of the alchemical process, if any of you have watched my video on YouTube of my webinar that I did back last September, I spoke about the alchemical process. And in alchemy itself, whether you're doing alchemy to transform lead into gold, or you are transforming your own healing within you, or you're doing it through some sort of union or relationship, there is a point of time in which you have a separation. Now that could be physically, it can be for a long period of time, it can be for a short period of time. In this instance, our soul agreement, my twin soul Chris and I, is to not have long periods of separation like some twin souls go through. And so the reason is because we're both already conscious beings. We're both already spiritually awake and aware before we even came together. And so that spiritual awareness has gotten deeper, obviously, and awakeness has gotten deeper, obviously. And so as we go through those layers, our separations are not nearly as many. However, there has been times that I've had to walk away. Now, I had to do so firmly this time, and this is why I spoke of such in my last video, because it was the only way I knew, and the only way that the Master Artist knew, God knew, to get his attention, to have him to wake up to these last aspects and to heal them. So he has awoken to that, and there has been a huge shift in that. And so within that, there has been a co-creation that has occurred, which actually began a little bit before I did this walking away. Now, it has accelerated even more. And so I will share more about that in my next video, but I will say that he is being a wonderful guide and help to me in so many ways, and we are this for each other. I don't know if many of you remember this, but last year in August, he became very sick, and he ended up having an infection that went into his kidneys. And so I was there, right there by his side with him as much as I could be. We have a border that separates us at this present moment. But I was there via text, I was there via email, I was sending him energy and love, and that's the deepening of the connection of this heart connection, this soul connection that you have, whether you call it twin souls, twin flame, heart connection, whatever you call it. There is a connection that is beyond earthly dynamics of relationships. And so I helped him in being there for him when he appeared to be so close to death and so very sick. And so he was there for me during my recent death and subsequently all the way through, as I've shared in my videos. And so my walking away and letting go as firmly as I had to was necessary so that he could awaken and shift through and heal through the things that of his behaviors that were not conducive to our union. So that said, this co-creation is being him helping me from behind the scenes, but yet I want to acknowledge him, to thank him and appreciate him, because I appreciate so much all that we've been through. It has not been easy. And at the same moment, it's being also blessed with a very, very deep love. Standing firm in those moments, saying, hey, it's not okay for this behavior, yet also unconditionally loving him and him unconditionally loving me. And so I wanted to let you know about that before I spoke about grief. Now, in this topic about grief, I myself have had my own experiences with grief. Many of you who have been following my twin soul path and journey know that my original twin soul was embodied in Steve, and that he was killed. And not just killed, but he was brutally killed. He was killed by a drunk driver. And I was not there physically, but my body actually astrally projected and saw his death, saw him being killed, and then a couple of hours later I received the phone call. I went through a period of 20 years of grief. I actually suppressed my grief and moved on to, in some ways, forgetting about him, shutting off that connection from what we call the other side of the veil. I didn't hear the communication that I was experiencing with Steve. And it wasn't until I became very sick 16 years ago and literally was on my hands and knees that he came to me and said, you know who this is, get the F up. That startled me back into the realization of communicating with him from the other side of the veil. So I had my own means of grief. I also lost my daughter Caitlin Rose, who's in spirit. Those of you who follow me on Facebook and YouTube, and know I've talked about this in videos as well, so you know of that. I've talked about it on air. My daughter I was 5.5 months pregnant with my daughter. This was many years ago. And she died in my womb, and I had to give birth to her stillborn. Until you've lost a child, many do not understand what grief is. So grief from the human experience is very, very real. It's not to discount it, and I've had my own experience with it, and I'm sure you who are listening in some form or fashion, either personally or know someone who has experienced grief. As I said earlier in the beginning of this video too, we are experiencing a collective grief. Back in August of last year, we lost one of our most beloved and cherished spiritual leaders, Dr. Wayne Dyer. For him and his family, and for the world over, including myself, it has been its own grieving process. And just recently, we lost Prince. So I want to speak to this because there is this part of the humanness that experiences this deep grief, this deep loss, this sense of loss. And from the human perspective, it is very real. And we are not to discount that. I'm going to invite you, however, to reach for that higher path that I spoke of in my couple videos ago, which is also why I reached for the higher path in bringing my twin soul back into my life and allowing him to be a part of my life. And this higher path is about seeing beyond the earthly into the spiritual, not to ever discount the earthly. We are here and we are real, and we are here to experience human emotion. That's why we came here. Yet also in the balance, we are to reach for that spiritual context. Now, I recently had a mentoring session with a gentleman in which he had explained to me that his mother had just passed on to the other side. She had transitioned, or what we call from the earthly perspective, died, back in January. And one of the things he said in his session with me was that he never communicated with his mother, and he had lost his father a couple of years before this, and he didn't communicate with him either, is what he said. So he was also coming from a religious background, which I did not know this until long after our session. I had found this out after. However, because he did not choose to divulge that, and that was fine. However, spiritual doesn't mean religious, and religious doesn't mean spiritual. I am spiritual, yet not religious. When I say that, I mean that I'm free from being into the indoctrinational programming of what religion is. I embrace religion, and my doctorate is in world religion and spirituality. So I embrace religion for what its intent is. And its intent is, the underlying basis of all religions is love. And so whether you believe in something in a different faith or not, this has nothing to do with faith or religion. This has to do with seeing beyond. For what I shared with him was, can you not understand that your mother and your father are communicating with them? It's just your relationship with them has changed. Wayne Dyer spoke of it as he never feared death, nor do I. And the reason he never feared death was because he understood that our soul is infinite. That while, yes, we have this physical body, and it is very real, and it can die, and it can leave. I'm living proof of that one. And also come back. At the same moment, our soul, which is encased in this body temple, is beyond this body. We are infinite. And so Wayne Dyer would often say that death simply means you're just going into the next room. So our relationship with our loved ones simply just changes. We communicate differently. And what it is that we really grieve is the physical, is the earthly. It's the being able to touch that person again, to hold them, to kiss them, to converse with them, to laugh with them, to experience life in all its passion together with them. That's what we grieve. That's what we miss. That's what we long for again. And again, that is very real. If I could hold my daughter again and actually have seen her grow up and to see her marry, that would have been my greatest joy in this life. Having my twin soul back incarnated into Chris, I have that opportunity once again. Yet right now, a border separates us. So I've learned what I have learned or soul remembered all along since I was a child. And I've said this since I was a child, that in matters of the heart and spirit, age is just a number. What that also means is no matter whether you're physically with someone, whether they're across the border, whether they're across the globe, or across the earth, or whether they're on what's known as the other side of the veil, back home with Source, God, Spirit, the Master Artist, in those infinite realms of beautifulness that is love, we still have a communication and a connection with those we love. Our first communication actually is not the voice like I'm speaking to you now. It's vibration. It's energy. So what does that mean? Vibration and energy means that we can communicate with our loved ones anytime, anywhere, no matter where they are. If they're off in another dimension or if they are no longer physically here, no, we cannot physically hold them again. No, we cannot kiss them. We cannot laugh with them in the same ways. But yet we can still hold them and we still can communicate with them. It's telepathic, it's energetic, it's vibrational that we do that. Just like I do with my twin soul right now and he does with me. I will often text him and say, I imagine us holding one another as we sleep together. Good night, sweet dreams. I will often text him and say, you know, I feel you so deeply, a song coming through. And most of the time, it is coming through, and he'll confirm that. Just like when I died 2.5 months ago, he came to me in soul and in spirit, brought me back from death, singing to me, speaking to me. When I had my second surgery, he also did the same thing, and he literally texted me saying, okay, I'm starting to play right now. And I could hear him. I could feel him. I always feel him, and he always feels me. Right now, it's as if he's sitting here right with me doing this video. It's like I can feel his touch on my arm right now as I get like these chills. That's our loved ones communicating with us, whether they're on the other side of the border or on the other side of the veil. You may get it through a song, as my twin soul often does to me. He sends me energetically, telepathically his songs. The other day he did that, which is actually what brought him back to me. He knew I had cut off communication with him. And he knew that I did not want to receive text or email from him, that I was done, that his behavior was just too hurtful and too painful from an earthly perspective. So what did he do? He did it energetically, vibrationally, telepathically. He started sending me his song, It's for Love. And that song is something very special to us because it was at a time when he thought he could do no better. And he knows, regardless of our union, our relationship, our connection, as twin souls, I have always been objective about his music. I'm his music manager. I help him in the realms of music energetically as well as physically and many other ways, doing videos for him and everything else. And so this day, he knew it was constructive criticism. He knew I wasn't trying to be harmful or hurtful, but when he sent me the original version of It's for Love, it wasn't the greatest version. It wasn't his greatest work, and I knew it. I felt it inside. And so I said to him, please go back and rework this. Now he got his back up in ego and went, oh no, this is my greatest work. And, for hours that evening, he would text me and fight me and email me and fight me and say, oh, this is my best work and everything else. And I kept insisting in a loving way and just said, I know you can do better. Please go back and rework this. So the next day, he was meditating at our special place in Cousins Bay where we both loved to be, and I spent years doing so when I lived there at home. And he texted me and said, you know what, you're right. I do need to rework it. And he wasn't saying it like, oh, you're right, like, some self-righteous thing. It was like, yeah, I understand. I appreciate your feedback. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate the fact that you know that this is off. And thank you for telling me. All that was in that just little text message, because men obviously communicate a little differently than we women do. So later that evening, he reworked the song, sent it to me, and sent it with a message saying, so much for I can't do better. Well, of course, the next version was spot on. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And so he energetically, telepathically sent me that song as a message to remind me of what I'm sharing with you here. To remind me that he could do better. That when he brought me back from death 2 months ago, that he promised me, he told me that he would do it right this time. That he would come here, that he would marry me, that we would do it right. And that his behavior, he knew, was wrong, and that he was going to make the shifts necessary. So that is why we then communicated again, and have been since. Our loved ones bring us forth messages all the time like that. I get messages from Source, the Master Artist, God Spirit, through weird things like spam email, or a license plate, or a billboard as I'm walking down the street or driving down the street. There are a million ways that Source and our loved ones communicate with us, if we but open to see. So when I shared that with that gentleman in our session a week or so ago, he found that to be a breath of fresh air, even though he's religious and he believes in a religion. He could see value in realizing, you know what? Because even in the Bible, it shares how Jesus communicates with us from the other side. He rose from the dead. He came to Mary Magdalene. He came to the apostles. Was that physically walking on this earth? No. He was, quote unquote, dead. He had risen from the dead, and what that was is the Christ consciousness coming back in another energy from the other room, as Wayne Dyer would say. My daughter communicates with me all the time. I feel her presence. In fact, for those of you who paid attention to my Facebook during this whole process of my death, when I was in hospital for those 11 days, there was a woman who was studying to be a minister, who wasn't one of my nurses. Her name is Kaylin, very close to my daughter's name, Caitlin. And she came in, and she was a godsend. She came in, she prayed with me, we sat together, and I knew in those moments that was my daughter, Caitlin, being with me. So there's one other thing I wish to invite you to see when it comes to grieving. That it's okay to go through your earthly process of grieving. There is the 5 stages of grieving. You go through the anger, you go through the bargaining, and you come to a place eventually of acceptance and peace, and of deep love and deep understanding, and knowing what I'm sharing with you here. I actually wrote about this 10 years ago in my book that I published, Stepping into Spiritual Oneness, because my dear friend Jim had crossed over. And that was our main reason for connecting, actually, I believe it was in April. It was this time that year in 2005, and he passed over on Remembrance Day, 11 November 2005. This year it'll be 11 years since he physically crossed, and when he crossed over, I was grieving very deeply, and I couldn't figure out why. And the reason was because he and I were lovers in another life, and we were deep soulmates. We had a deep heart-centered connection. And so I know Jim is with me as I'm doing this video right now, because he came in to say, hey, remember me? You got to say about this. So I wrote about this in my book that I published the year later, about this grieving process and how our loved ones are just on the other side of the room or in the next room. And they're always communicating with us. And so the last thing I would like to leave you with, and I'm going to leave you the link here in the video description so you can actually see it. And speaking of Prince, Prince is coming through in another way. There is a gentleman named Prince EA, I believe is his name, on YouTube. And he just recently did a video called Everyone Dies, but No One Lives, or something along the lines of that. And I'm going to leave the link in the video description here for you to watch it. It's very, very powerful. What he speaks of in a nutshell is what I'm going to invite you to do. So many of us spend our times grieving over our loved ones, and it's appropriate and okay. But reaching for that higher path of the balance of spiritual, our loved ones are, what do we always say? Most of us say they're in a better place. It's because they are. No offense to this earth, it is beautiful here, and it is amazing. But as I shared in my last couple of videos, when you go back home to God, to Source, Master Artist, this Tao, this whatever source energy you want to call it, it is so much more beautiful than anything you can imagine here of your most beautiful, amazing day. And so when we say that somebody is on the other side and they're in a better place, and we know they're resting in peace and things like that, it's because it's true. I know. I've been there and back, so that I can share this wisdom with you of such things. So our loved ones, when they finally make the transition over into that light, into that love, they're okay. And they are happy, and they are in a better place. And what they want most for us is for us to not die while we're here on this earth, for us to live. To, yes, remember them and remember their life and remember the times that we had with them and the laughter and the tears and the holding them and everything else, and do that in another way, energetically, telepathically with them, and continue to live, and to live passionately, to find what it is that your life purpose is and your passion. And that's why I'm so excited to share with you, and I will be sharing in my next video, what it is I felt inspired to, because of my death, go and do in a creation and a co-creation. A co-creation with someone who's helping me out with the actual creation itself, and someone behind the scenes, my twin soul, who has been an instrumental help, and with his permission has allowed me to place him on the website for this creation. And so I deeply appreciate you, my love, and thank you, my beloved sweet troubadour. You are an amazing gift in so many ways to not only me, but to all of humanity. And I appreciate you for making the shifts out of that behavior and into that space of love, into being in the heart and out of the mind. And so in living passionately, I'm going to invite you, for all of those who are grieving over the loss of loved ones, whether it was yesterday of Prince, whether it was yesterday of your mother or father, or a twin soul, or whether it was 20 years ago, as it almost has been for my daughter. I invite you to be inspired to know that your loved ones want you to live and live passionately. So what are you passionate about? What is it that you can bring forth and live? Because none of us are getting out of here alive, quote unquote. All of our bodies are going to die, but our soul is infinite. And while we're here on this earth, we're here to experience joy and peace and inspiration, and yes, moments of grief, and yes, moments of anger and of fear and everything else. That's why we're here, to experience all of the human emotions and not discount them, to really feel them and realize we are human beings having a spiritual experience. And yet, we're also spiritual beings having a human experience. We bring it full circle. Wayne Dyer used to say that all the time, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Well, I brought it back full circle 10 years ago when I wrote my book and published it, and made it full circle because it's both and together. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, yes. And we are also human beings having a spiritual experience. We are both spiritual beings having a human experience and human beings having a spiritual experience. And within that, we rest, remember, embrace, and soulfully treasure the spiritual being that we are. So it's both and. So what are you passionate about? What can you get excited about that has you want to live, to not only benefit yourself, but benefit all of humanity? So I invite you to live. Live in all its glory, bumps, bruises, magnificence, and all, and know you are loved. I love you. I deeply love you. Thank you for being here on this planet. Thank you for inspiring me to stay here on this planet, my dearest twin soul, and all of you. So now, in creating anew of my transformation, please watch my next video coming up, and you will see what I've created. And we are creating in co-creation, all of us together. I love you all. I appreciate you all. Here's to living a beautiful life. We don't have to die to understand. We simply are to live. Espada.